Writers, I want to share with you one of my personal favorite tools when writing, which is asyndeton and polysyndeton. Now, syndeton is just a fancy word that means one's use of conjunctions. You know, those words like and, for, or, so, but, yet. So asyndeton is the removal of conjunctions, and polysyndeton refers to the use of multiple conjunctions. Both asyndeton and polysyndeton can be super useful tools in your writer's tool belt when used deliberately, so we'll take a look at what they are and some examples from literature. In discussing polysyndeton, I'll be looking mostly at examples using the conjunction and, just for the sake of focus, but keep in mind that the other conjunctions could apply in different contexts. First, let's take a look at the grammatically normative deployment of conjunctions, which is what you've probably been taught, and let's look specifically at how we use conjunctions in a list or a series of nouns, adjectives, or phrases. So let's say we're writing a story about someone who believes their house is haunted, and we write, quote, he checked under the bed, in the closet, and beneath the couch. So here, the listing of those prepositional phrases is separated by commas until the final item is joined with the Oxford comma and conjunction. However, if we were to use polysyndeton there, it could read, quote, he checked under the bed and in the closet and beneath the couch. Or alternatively, if we were to use asyndeton and cut those conjunctions, we'd have he checked under the bed, in the closet, beneath the couch. Notice the rhythmic changes in both. In the first, those conjunctions produce sort of a quasi-iambic rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, da-dum, da-dum, suggesting a more plodding series of actions, a very deliberate and methodical approach to the checking itself. Maybe our character in this scenario is made to feel more confident in combating the haunted house due to their level of preparation. Whereas in the second example with asyndeton, without conjunctions, it's much more staccato, perhaps indicative of a degree of panic, hurry, or disorder that is going into the checking itself. Let's take a look at some examples from literature, beginning with polysyndeton. Let's start first with William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury, the first chapter, which is narrated from the point of view of Benji, who is a cognitively disabled character. Lester came away from the flower tree and we went along the fence, and they stopped and we stopped, and I looked through the fence while Lester was hunting in the grass. Notice how the polysyndeton implies a kind of sensory process here, one in which Benji is piecing together details and input as he receives them, essentially a string of events occurring without any seeming causality. Not only does it clue us into Benji's unique perspective on the world, but in doing so it promotes a greater deal of empathy with that character. In effect, using grammar and the rhythm of grammar to show us something essential about Benji's point of view, and in doing so, disrupting uninterrogated neurotypical patterns of thought and language. Or let's look at one of my favorite passages from Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Quote, let the white folks have their money and power and segregation and sarcasm and big houses and schools and lawns like carpets and books, and mostly, let them have their whiteness. Notice how the list of white folks' privileges is connected with that conjunction and to the point that it feels overwhelming, much more overwhelming even than if it were connected by commas and then that one final conjunction. That rhythm seems to speak to a kind of deeply inequitable endlessness of privilege, which is then expertly juxtaposed in the final summation of whiteness. Now let's talk asyndeton. A very famous example is Julius Caesar's proclamation, I came, I saw, I conquered. Notice, no conjunctions at all, not even before the final item in the series, and that lack of conjunction speaks to the efficiency with which Caesar conquered. A famous example of asyndeton in literature comes from the opening line of Charles Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities. Quote, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. Notice how the lack of conjunctions here presents those various dichotomies, like best and worst, as being somewhat equal, while still juxtaposing their contradiction. And the lack of conjunctions produces a sort of chaos in the grammar itself that is a reflection of the period being described, one in which these contradictions were everywhere and all at once. And now you might be looking at Dickens's use of asyndeton and thinking to yourself that this is grammatically incorrect, as it is riddled with comma splices. And technically, they are comma splices, but here's the thing. In creative writing, you can break these prescriptive grammatical rules to achieve a desired effect. Now, it deserves to be said that authors who use these tools well understand that a little goes a long way. If you're using polysyndeton and asyndeton everywhere in your writing and your name is not James Joyce, then it could very easily overshadow or distract from your story itself. But when used deliberately, thoughtfully, and somewhat sparingly, it's a really powerful tool. And who said grammar isn't fun?